Several days ago, I put up a community post on my channel and I asked you guys to let me know a time in history when you thought that the average person could afford a home just working a regular job. I appreciate everybody who answered that and wrote in the comments and gave especially detailed descriptions because I wanted to use your answers to make today's video. And thanks to you, this video is going to be possible. So I appreciate everybody who shared your answers with me. And one thing I want to do is I'm going to take some of your specific examples that you gave me and we're going to go over, how much people paid for houses back when, what their incomes were, and kind of what all of that should look like today. Because as you guys can see, the whole idea of this video is what should a house really cost right now? And of course, the real answer to that is always based on supply and demand in any given area. Housing works off of supply and demand, and that's the reason why home prices are so high across the board right now, is because supply is so low. However, that's not something that's going to remain true and constant forever. We will have a resurgence in inventory once again. That's just the way the cycles of the market work, and I have no doubt that it's going to return to that. But let's take a look at what some of you guys had to say. This person said that in the early 90s, my dad was an apprentice carpenter and my mom stayed at home and they were able to afford a 3-bedroom house in the middle-class NYC suburbs. They were 20 and 22 years old, neither had a college degree. My sister and I were babies. They paid $80K for the house. Now my wife and I both have a 6-figure income and can barely afford a house in the same exact area. The house they bought is now $500K on Zillow, 500% price increase in 30 years. Now if we go back and we look at the Fred data to see what a median price home costs back in, let's say, 1993, because that's kind of like the early 90s, right? So the median price home throughout the country cost about $125,000 back then. They were able to get this house for $80K. So that's quite a bit below what the median price was back in those days. On top of that, these people were able to buy this house based on just one person working, only one income. Now, if we use the inflation calculator to take a look at how much $80,000 from 1993 would actually be today, it would be about 170 grand. But instead, the house that these people had now costs $500,000, not 170 grand. And first of all, I want to say that I'm well aware that home prices do not move in line and track with inflation. But the point of this video is to kind of show you what that house would cost relative to what it costs today. And the difference is astronomical. And by the way, for anybody wondering where I'm walking today, I am over at the Knox Miller Regional Bayshore Park here. And they have this little pond with a bunch of geese. And in the background, I'm sure maybe you guys can see the Richmond Bridge over there. So I'll show you guys that while we're here. Now, here's another example. Dave put that his dad bought a 3,000 square foot brand new house back in 1994, okay, for 160 grand. And he was a blue-collar worker, single income household, and he grew up in that house. Well, today, that same house should only cost $331,000. But I'm willing to bet that it probably costs at least double that. So you guys can see the problem here is that today, the incomes do not match up with inflation. But it gets better, guys, because I have some very specific examples of some things that some of you guys share with me that are really gonna make this interesting here. This person says that in 1987, I purchased a house for 1,300 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 2-car garage in Folsom, California. And they paid $84,000 for that house. He was 25, his wife was 24. And he made $13,800 a year and she made $12,000 a year. Their interest rate on the house was 8.44%. And he also agrees with me, saying that the house cost is way more important than the rate that you pay. And that was a really nice area, not a crime zone, and by the end of that year I was making $20K and we were sweet. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you guys what these house prices and incomes would look like today to see if any of this actually matches up and compare. Back in 1987, if you paid for an $84,000 house, then that would be like buying a $227,000 house today. As far as wages go, combined as a couple, they were making $25,800 per year, which would be equivalent to about $70,000 today. So it sounds like a pretty average American household, $220,000 house, $70,000 a year in income, right? But now let's take a look at, if you take these numbers and put it into Zillow's affordability calculator, could these people still afford to buy that same equivalent house and income based on today's numbers? If you made a $70,000 annual income, which is equivalent to what they were making back then, when you adjust for inflation, and you put down a $22,000 down payment, 40% debt to income ratio, and a 7.2% mortgage rate, that means you can afford a house of up to about $285,000, which is kind of in line with what that house should cost today. And then if we do that same calculation based on their old numbers and income, $25,800 a year income, $8,400 down payment, and I'm using 10% as the down payment because that's kind of what most people do, 40% debt to income ratio, and their actual interest rate, which I appreciate them sharing with me, 8.44%, means that they could afford a $91,000 home. So when you adjust for inflation, these numbers actually make a lot of sense. That person could afford that house back then just like they could afford it today. So when you look at it, the affordability is actually neck and neck with where it's at right now. Except there is one little problem, guys. And the problem is that when you look at Folsom, California, the median home price there today is $732,000. $732,000, you heard that correctly. But what it should cost is about $225,000. Even if we went by their affordability standards, stretching the income, then that would still put it at $285,000, the max of what that typical household could earn and buy today. And that is such a huge difference, okay? When you look at $285,000 versus $732,000 is an astronomical difference. What this means is it's basically completely unaffordable for the average person today. So far, what this is showing us is that it's not your imagination that homes are more expensive today than they were in 1987, because they were. If home prices went up at the same rate that wages have, then homes today would still be very affordable, as we can see by the inflation calculator. That pretty much proves that the home prices have far surpassed what people are getting paid. And I know I don't really have to make a video to tell you guys about this, but I thought it would be interesting to show you some real world specific examples from you guys. Now let's move on to Chicago, the good old Midwest where I'm from. I grew up 90 minutes right outside of the city. Nice to hear an Illinois story here. So this person says, my dad worked for the City of Chicago Water Department, 1974. He made $14K a year. Mom stayed home, raised all 5 of us boys. We had a new house, $32K, 4-bed, 2.5 bath, 2 cars, and a small fishing boat. Mom would do hair out of the house for extra cash. We lived great. If I made $14K now, I would be homeless and starving. And man, I couldn't agree with you more. It's really sad that that's what it's come down to now, that people cannot get by on a living wage anymore. But Chicago is actually one of those metros where home prices are actually still going up. In fact, according to Redfin, home prices there are still up 4.6% year over year right now. Let's take a look at these numbers and adjust them for inflation. If you made $14,000 a year back in 1974, that would be equivalent to making about $87,000 a year right now, which is actually pretty good. So you can see that making $14K a year back in 1974 was not just a living wage, like that was actually really good money. And then the home price, they only paid $32,000 for the house in 1974. So today, that would be about a $200,000 house. But once again, here's the problem. The median home price in Chicago is $340K. But if everything tracked with inflation and wages, it should only be $200K. So you can easily see where the disconnect here is today when it comes to price to income ratios and affordability on housing. And honestly, guys, we don't even need to look at the calculator for this to see if somebody could actually afford that house, because absolutely their salary was literally almost half of what the home cost back then. Like, how many people today have an annual salary that is half of what their home cost is? Let me know. I mean, I'm sure a few of you out there do, but I would be willing to bet that the vast majority of folks do not make anywhere near half as much as their house costs. Okay, and that's the biggest problem with the housing situation that we're in today. How about this one? Back in 1988, I bought a 1,700 square foot house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath for 35 grand. Decent neighborhood and good school district. We were making $25,000 a year. Our mortgage payment was $550 a month, including taxes and PMI. We were in our 20s. Man, does that sound like the good old days. You're making 25 grand a year and your house only costs 35 grand. You could literally live at home with your parents for a year and a half, stack your salary, and pay cash for a house. Like, the good old days of that are absolutely gone. And let's look at our inflation calculator. Back in 1988, $35,000 would be equivalent to about $91,000 today. That's only a $91,000 house. There's only a handful of places left in the entire country where you can still actually buy a house for only $91,000. And the salary, that was actually very good. 1988, making 25 grand a year, that's 65 grand today. And really the kind of the point I want to drive home with these real world examples that you guys have shown here is that, number one, it's actually way harder to buy a house today. So it's not just, oh, you know, pull up your bootstraps and get to work and save more. It's not really that simple for the younger generation. Now, I would definitely say, just like when I talked to Margaret yesterday in my video, which you guys, if you didn't see that, go check it out. I met one of my subscribers from this area, you know, been watching my videos, and she would say that most young people need to learn how to sacrifice more. And I agree, because if you want something, anything in life, especially big goals like buying a home, you need to be able to sacrifice and do whatever it takes to get it. No more Starbucks, no more eating out, no more vacations, no more going to the bars, the clubs, any of that crap needs to be completely cut out for a while if you want to be able to achieve your version of the American dream. However, that being said, this video right now so far is proof that it used to be easier to be able to achieve that dream than it is today. That's just the reality, just based on the fundamental numbers here of what people used to make, what homes used to cost, and your stories. How about this one, another Chicago story. 1985, Dad bought a $90,000 house in a middle upper class neighborhood, suburb of Chicago, 5-bedroom, 2-bath, made $55K a year. Mom didn't work, 6 kids, sold 10 years ago for $625,000. They don't understand how none of their 6 kids can afford to live in a nice quality town where they were raised in, and now they own 3 condos. I'm guessing they mean the parents own 3 condos. Well, that's just it, guys. It just goes to show you that if you were just born at the right time, then you could have achieved a massive amount of wealth pretty easily compared to what it's like today. Here's another one. I bought my first home back in 2002 for $132,000, had no problem affording it. Purchased my second in 2011 for $135K. Things were not as easy then, and the home needed work. Sold that house in 2021 for a very good profit, moved for a job promotion, and now can't afford to purchase unless we want to be house poor or in something we don't want due to moving in a more expensive area and making twice the money. Renting has been cheaper and we were able to save. Go figure. Man, I love this example for a lot of different reasons, because it also goes to show you that you don't have to go back to 1985 or the 1960s or whatever for housing to have been affordable, guys. And really not that long ago, housing was still relatively affordable. 2011 was only 12 years ago, okay? So that's not that long. That just goes to show you how much the Fed intervention and the government intervention with our lives and our financial system has completely exploded things out of whack and made everyday things that people should be able to afford unaffordable. Here's one that I just loved reading. There's so much truth to this. I'm old enough to remember that the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s was a reasonably priced time to buy a home relative to percentage of income. And if one's income to debt ratios were not desirable, the bank or financial institution would send you on your way. A mortgage was generally not more than 25% of your monthly income. Things began to change in the mid-90s with the influx of illegal immigration in massive amounts. They eventually put a greater demand for homes. Then eventually the subprime lending started and Wall Street got into the game with derivative investments based on real estate. Homes got hyperinflated then, and eventually the real estate market along with the economy crashed. Today, mortgages are 40% or more of monthly income. Another one I just couldn't agree with more. You guys can see also how debt has helped make real estate more expensive. Because if you wanted to get a loan for more than a 25% ratio back then for your home, they would say, see you later, okay? In the 70s, 80s, early 90s. But now they're stretching it into the mid 40s. And if you're an FHA borrower, guys, sometimes it's even in the 50s or 60 percentile range, they're approving people debt to income ratio. So basically, they're putting people into homes that, first of all, actually can't afford it. And I've covered that many times here on the channel. If they have any sort of financial emergency, they're going to be defaulting on that house in no time because the payment eats up such a huge chunk of their monthly income. But also, what this debt bubble does is it allows people to purchase homes beyond their means, which means people that don't make a lot of money can spend a lot of money to buy a house. And then just think what that does to people that actually do make a lot of money. They can spend far more because of these higher debt to income ratios. So that also helps push up the price of housing, because the more debt that people can take out on a home, then the more essentially it inflates the value of it, because it basically allows people to purchase homes that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. And so that's the other main point you have to understand with this. And this is so true also. When you look at the price to income ratio over the years, the normal is 3 times income. If you make 100K, you can afford a 300K house. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's how your general finances are supposed to work. But as Mike so clearly points out, all the extras like property taxes, insurance, HOA, and repairs have been increasing. So now 3 times income is even stretching it for people, along with all the extra expenses like cable TV, Starbucks coffee, etc. And that's just like I was talking with Margaret yesterday. This is where sacrifice comes in for young people. Nobody wants to just not spend money on these things, guys. Everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too, and that's all fine and dandy until you're gonna complain you can't afford to buy a house. And like I've proven in this video, I get that it's more expensive today relative to what it was 30 or 40 years ago when you look at price to income ratio. But it is still doable. People can still achieve it, is the point. It's not like it's out of reach. It can be done. Now, in some areas, like here in the Bay Area, it might feel like it's out of reach because if the median home price in your area is $1.5 to $2 million, then it very well could be out of reach. But I would still say that in probably a good vast majority of the country, probably 80% of places, it is still possible for people to pull up their bootstraps, get motivated, and save enough money to be able to buy a house. I'm not saying in cash, but I'm saying to have a sizable down payment, 20%, and to have your finances in order to where you can afford the payment. Like this person just reminded all of you, and like I say all the time in my videos, it's not just the payment you need to be able to afford. You need to be able to afford all the expenses that come along with owning that home, guys. Property taxes, insurance, and the mortgage are all like almost equal now. You're gonna pay just as much for all of those things in some cases because it's gotten so expensive. Throw in an HOA fee, throw in the yearly home repairs, and owning a home can very well be way more expensive than actually renting one, as one of my other viewers here pointed out in a previous comment. Now let's move on to another example from Lewiston, Maine. And I wanted to try to choose different things that you guys wrote me from different areas of the country to show that it was pretty much affordable everywhere. Also, I wanted to just get different people's take on things. It's not like the whole country lives in California or Florida, and so it's important to see different perspectives here. This person says, thankful to be a boomer here. In 1993, bought a 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath home, 20-year-old ranch in Lewiston, Maine. 1-car garage, it appraised at $80K, was listed at $79K and paid $76K, and had the loan at $64K for 7.5% interest rate for 30 years. Paid it off in full in 17 years in 2010 on a police officer's salary. Very glad to have born and lived as a boomer. Once again, a very valid point, okay? Being a baby boomer just means you were born at the right time in history where these opportunities were available. Well, now they're not. So people who are my age and younger do need to work harder, guys. You have to if you want to make this happen. Otherwise, it just won't for you, unfortunately. And it's up to you to decide if you're willing to, basically do what it takes to go that extra mile, I guess. But let's take a look here. That home price today, they paid $76,000 for that house, and when you adjust for inflation, today, that would be $161,000. But yet the problem is, when we look at Lewiston, Maine, the median home price there is $300K, which is close to double what it would be if homes tracked with inflation. So you guys are starting to see the trend here that obviously homes don't track with inflation, and the amount of appreciation that houses have seen over the past 40 to 50 years have been tremendous. And probably a large chunk of that gain was actually really gained in the past 15 to 20 years when we saw these huge housing bubbles form and then bust. Also, one thing I gathered from all of your comments is that it seems like 80s and the 90s were a pretty popular time for many of you to buy a home. It seemed like when a lot of people who watch this channel were kind of jumping on the home buying bandwagon. And I did see many other comments and different people saying different years, and a lot of them were in the 80s. I saw some in the 70s, few of them in the 60s as well, But it seems like largely most people could agree that the best of times are over when it comes to the most affordable time to buy a home. Now, how about a Florida example? I could not finish this video without giving you guys a Florida example. Once again, 1989, Florida, St. Petersburg. They even gave the address of the house here. Paid $66,000 with their public supermarket salary of $30,000 a year. That house now on Zillow is worth $492,000. A $66,000 house back in 1989 would be equivalent to a $163,000 house today, which is still very affordable, I would say, by most people's standards. And when you look at the salary, it gets even better, because $30,000 a year salary in 1989 would be like making $74,000 a year today, which is very good money, first of all. And second of all, that's literally half of a $163,000 home price. So somebody who made that kind of money could easily afford a house like that if that's how much it actually costs. But instead, the house actually costs $500,000. So nobody working at Publix is going to be buying a $500,000 house, guys. So that's the problem with all of this. So I just think it's very interesting that you don't have to go that far back into history to a time when not only could most people working regular jobs, just people that work at Publix, police officers, nurses, just everybody who works a regular job that doesn't require you to get some kind of master's degree, could easily afford the average price home back in the day. And now that that's out of reach, it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad that that's the state of affairs, and this is where the country is at with all of it. And I know people will say, well, we need to ban investors, we need to ban institutional investment, and maybe there is some legitimacy to all of that. But you got to remember, once the government starts getting involved and once things start being banned, who knows what else they're going to ban. So that's the problem with those guys stepping in and trying to make a change, because they could end up making things worse rather than better, like they usually do. And one thing that we can also see is not only were the prices in line, but in many cases, like I just showed from these examples here, is people's incomes were literally almost half of what they paid for homes, sometimes actually more than half, which would be a godsend right now, I think, for most people watching who will want to buy a home. And here's a funny, quick little example for you guys. Like, whenever I'm traveling like this, I bring my little Chromecast with me so I can plug it into the TV, and I don't have to sign in and out of everybody else's apps on their smart TV. I have my own thing so it's all signed into my stuff. I just plug it in and unplug it when I leave. Well, lately I found out on the Chromecast they have this free Baywatch channel, and they're playing Baywatch 24/7. And I used to watch Baywatch when I was a little kid, and now I'm watching it again as an adult. And of course, you see things through a totally different lens when you're older. And one thing I notice is Mitch Buchanan, David Hasselhoff, right? He's like the head lifeguard in the story. Well, they show a bunch of shots of him going to his house in the Venice canals, and that was back in the early to mid 90s. And today it would be laughable to think that a lifeguard could afford a house in the Venice canals because they all cost $2-3 million, right? But back in the mid 90s, that was probably actually a reality, that somebody like Mitch Buchanan, the head lifeguard of Baywatch, could afford that house, because back in those days, those houses used to only cost like $280,000. So go figure that even a funny old Baywatch example proves that housing used to be affordable for the average person. So have a laugh on that one. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.